there is a different timeline that goes on in the Gospels, and it begins really on the 14th day. Okay, this is when in the three synoptic Gospels it says on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, okay, when they are to sacrifice the Passover, the disciples asked Jesus where we to go and make preparations to have the Passover. So we know that in the three Gospels it is Passover. Okay, so they're getting ready for it. Jesus says, obviously, go into the city ahead of you, follow a man that's carrying a water jug, enter into the house he goes into, and ask the master of that house, where is the guest room where the teacher may eat his Passover meal with his disciples? And he will show you an upper room fully furnished and ready, and you're to go and make preparations there. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, we know that it's Peter and John that he sends ahead to do that. So this is what's going on during the daytime of the 14th day, which is known as the day of preparation for the Passover. So this is what's happening on the 14th day to get ready for the evening when they are to sacrifice the Passover lamb at twilight, because Passover night actually begins at 6 p.m. On the 14th day, and that's also coincides with the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, because that also begins on the evening of the 14th day. Okay, Passover night is only 12 hours long. It's from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. The Feast of Unleavened Bread goes for a whole week, as we know, from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. Therefore, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread goes from the evening of the 14th day to the evening of the 15th day. It's quite simple and straightforward. So, the reason why it says in Matthew 26, verse 17, Mark 14, verse 12, and Luke 22, verse 7, on the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the reason is because that's saying that is the 14th day, okay? Because later on in the evening, that's when they are to sacrifice the Passover, and that initiates, obviously, the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread and also Passover night. So in the three synoptic Gospels, we have that Jesus has the Passover meal with his disciples in those three Gospels. Yet in the Gospel of John, we read in John 13, verse 1, that it was before the feast of Passover that they had supper together. Now, this is commonly known as the Last Supper, and this is mentioned by Paul in the letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And this is where it was revealed to him what Jesus did at that Last Supper on the night that he was betrayed. So this is really interesting. It's because even though we have that it was Passover night in the three synoptic Gospels, and that it was the before the Passover in the Gospel of John when they had the supper, it's still the same night when Jesus is betrayed. And this night is really what we have is the 4 blood moons, which are 4 signs for the 4 night watches of what I call first Passover night. Okay, so this is where Jesus takes his disciples to watch and pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane in the 3 synoptic Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But he doesn't take his disciples to go and watch and pray because it isn't Passover night. The only in the Gospel of John, the only reason why he takes them to watch and pray with him in the other 3 Gospels is because Passover night is to be kept as a night of watching, Exodus 12, for all generations unto the Lord, for it was the night when he led them out of Egypt. So this is really why Jesus was keeping watch, and this is why we have this amazing kind of correlation where Jesus says, no one knows the day or the hour, but we are to watch and pray that we may be counted worthy to escape these terrible times that are coming. Jesus is deliberately pointing towards the time frame of Passover night. So what happens then in the first night is obviously we know that Judas arrives at midnight, and Jesus is betrayed and arrested and taken to the religious leaders. So what we have then is Jesus is taken to the religious leaders and is questioned and by the high priest, and then in the morning he's taken to Pontius Pilate. Okay, so now we get to the morning. So, as we know, when Jesus is taken to Pontius Pilate in the morning, it's here that we read in the Gospel of John, chapter 18, verse 28, that it says that the Jewish leaders didn't want to enter into the praetorium of Pontius Pilate because they didn't want to defile themselves so that they could have the Passover meal later on that day. So they hadn't actually had the Passover. And so this is what's powerful, is that we have obviously the Passover night really on the top bar there going to be happening at 6 p.m. Okay, so really when we look at the Gospel of John account, this is where we find out that this is now the 14th day. And this is obviously during the daytime is the preparation for the Passover. So this is why Jesus goes through this process of being flogged, mocked, and crucified. Now we know that it goes dark between the 6th and the 9th hours. Okay, so this is really what we have in the three synoptic gospels of it going dark, but there's no mention of it going dark in the Gospel of John. And the reason for that is because Jesus is fulfilling Passover as the Passover Lamb of God. So what we have is we have it the Passover night lasting 6 months compared to the first Passover night that lasted 2 years. This second Passover night in the Gospel of John, from the 11th of April to the 6th of October, is actually 6 months long, which obviously I've already shown you that obviously there was this kind of delay time frame of a month anyway between the three synoptic gospels and the Gospel of John. And we know that there is a difference because when Mary goes to the tomb, it says in the Gospel of Mark that it was sunrise when she went to the tomb, but in the Gospel of John, it was still dark. So there's a clear contrast and difference between these timelines, between the three synoptic gospels and the Gospel of John. And also, we know that it says in the Gospel of Mark as well that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour, which is 9 a.m. Okay, and yet in the Gospel of John, right, Jesus is still with Pontius Pilate around the 6th hour. Okay, which is noon. So how can he be on the cross at 9 a.m. and yet still be with Pontius Pilate at noon? It's totally impossible. It's a great mystery that's being revealed in this timeline, that we have all these mysteries going on. How come that Jesus was able to be betrayed in one night, and yet in the Gospel of John it's before the feast of Passover, and yet in the other three synoptic gospels it was Passover night that they had, the Passover meal together in those three synoptic gospels. It's a great mystery, and this is why this timeline makes sense of it. And so, of course, we have these signs, as I've shown you. The 4 blood moons are 4 signs for the 4 night watches of first Passover night, with the solar eclipses being markers really for the 3 nights. So we have obviously the first solar eclipse there, which is the 14th night. Then the second solar eclipse there is the 15th night, and then the third solar eclipse here is the 16th night. And so 2 weeks after the solar eclipse is when the day begins. So this is happening, these 3 days, 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th days going on. So this is now the 3rd day. This is the day really that we've entered into since the 6th of September there, which is when the 17th day began. So we're in the 3rd day. And as I say, with this new understanding and, revelation of understanding that there is a difference between the Gospel of John and the 3 synoptic Gospels, the 9th hour actually continues until the 4th of December. Because as I say, each hour of this timeline is 2 months. And, if you continue to add, the hours up, you get to, if you don't take into account the extra month, you actually fall short on the 6 p.m. marker on the 3 synoptic gospels there. The 2nd of March is too soon, it's too premature. So this is why we need the extra month, the 13th month. And it's just amazing how God has divinely done this in our generation. This is the time frame and period that was prophetically written 2000 years ago for this time period now. And this is so powerful, and I hope that you can really grasp this. We're still in the 14th day, okay? This is still the 14th day, and yet it's the 17th day on this timeline, which gives rise and understanding to why Jesus said to the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." This answers it, because it is this day. It's after 3 days and 3 nights, and it's also still in the 14th day. Well, I hope that's made sense for you and blessed you. And I know it's a long video, but I had to, go over some issues again just to show you and remind you of this timeline and how it's all in the Gospels. Go and read the Gospels. Go and read what happens to Jesus um, from the night that he's betrayed when they have the Passover meal. Check out these scriptures. Begin from Matthew 26 verse 17, Mark 14 verse 12, Luke 22 verse 7. Begin from there, and also begin from John 13 verse 1. And you read it. You find out. You see the fact that Jesus was betrayed um, in one night, and yet it's two totally different nights. You go and see that. And if you find it, let me know. Overcomer888 at yahoo.com. God bless you. Have a great day.